don't forget that marketing is an art and a science, not just a science and not just an art. It's the yin and yang of, creativity and data. And I think it's very important to remember that, yes, data is very powerful, but never underestimate the power of emotion. Because even if you work in B2B, you're still talking to real people who actually are driven by their feelings and not their thoughts most of the time. So data can help you, and it can give you insights, but it can't tell the story. And it's stories that get people to change their behavior. So I graduated in maths, so I've always had a bit of a bias towards data. But I've also had a real passion for creativity and psychology. So it felt like marketing was the ideal career for me. I was quite an unusual marketer when I first joined my first company, which is British Airways. Most of the other people working in marketing were from more kind of language or creative backgrounds. So, this was kind of pre-internet days. So, it was a real opportunity for me to see kind of how data and the creativity could come together. I joined, as I said, the airline industry, which actually, interestingly, is probably one of the earliest examples of where business has really, really embraced data and data science and put it at the heart of their organization. So, revenue management, there's, hundreds and thousands of case studies about how airlines do revenue management and how data is at the heart of kind of revenue and growth for those type of companies. So I was very lucky to get exposed to marketing in a very kind of broadly defined way very early on in my career, because British Airways really kind of saw, as a service company, really saw marketing as, the classic 4 Ps of product, price, promotion and place. And so pretty much every function was actually part of the marketing organization, including sales and product development and even service delivery, right? So cabin crew and ground staff. So it was a great opportunity to cut your teeth. And again, as a marketer, gave me the exposure to everything from, using data to help the sales team target customers, to looking at kind of brand metrics in the brand organization, through to working in pricing and using enormous amounts of data to help kind of grow the revenue of the company. So it was a kind of a great grounding for me, and it what really kind of cemented my passion for kind of bringing together the sort of the art and science of marketing together through kind of data and creativity. So it was fun. I then left marketing for a while, went off to be a strategy consultant for one of the big strategy houses, and then kind of came back to marketing, joined American Express, and then went on to work at PayPal, and then most recently have done lots of advising and consulting roles for startups, and then actually joined Snappy as employee number 90 in March last year. So it's been a fantastic opportunity to kind of work in lots of different countries, lots of different sectors, Snappy is just a fabulous brand that's growing incredibly quickly, and it's a great example of kind of how we can bring together kind of like data and data science around gifting with kind of a really compelling, wonderful brand that we've got here to kind of really drive growth and business results. I think, honestly, my first experience of data was actually in the airline industry, right? And as I said, sort of revenue management and pricing is very, very driven by data. But I think if I think more to sort of maybe marketing campaigns and how I've used marketing campaigns and data in marketing campaigns, it's probably kind of more relevant to talk about sort of some of my more recent examples. So both at PayPal and also at Snappy. And I think there's probably a couple of things worth kind of noting is, what we use data for and at what step of the campaign development process. So, if we kind of go big picture for a moment, it's, what is marketing all about? Why do we do marketing, right? And how do you do it well? And fundamentally, whether you work in high tech or fintech or like a traditional brand, or even an individual consultant, who wants to sell consulting work. At the end of the day, right, it really boils down to some very simple guiding principles. Your job as a marketer is to deliver really relevant, engaging messages about why you're better than the competition in a timely way, through a channel in which your audience is consuming media that drives some form of customer action. Ultimately what you really want is to use messaging to persuade a customer to choose and try your product, hopefully love your product and recommend it to all of their friends. And so to do that, you've really got to think about the sort of the life stages of a campaign and what you're trying to do. And so I've always use like a 4-step process, and to think about each step on what information and what insights I need at each of those steps in order to kind of bring a campaign to life. So I think for me, step 1, it's kind of marketing 101, but it's all about targeting. People often talk about segmentation and targeting, but I actually like to really, really focus in on targeting, because in today's data-driven world, right, segmentation is an interesting way to report, but it's actually, most of the work we do now is, 100% personalized to an individual. So, yes, you need to understand broad categories of personas and people, but ultimately we're really targeting you as an individual person at the moment that you want to engage with us. So step 1 is targeting. Obviously data is super key in targeting, and so you need to do that at a market level. So have really good market analytics. How many gift senders do you have in the US? How much do people spend on gifts? Who are the kind of key buyers? Who are the personas? And really kind of nail it down to who's who. And then obviously you need to understand what media they consume, right? So are they using Google search, Bing search? Are they consuming media at events? Are they consuming media through trade publications? And make sure that you have a really good grasp of, what your audience is doing, where they're consuming media, and obviously how much that media costs, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to understand that too. So for me, step 1, there's a lot of analysis that goes into the beginning of a campaign, and that is really about setting your strategy of who you're going after and what channels you're going to go after them in. So that's step 1. Step 2 is actually an interesting one that I think many marketers fail to understand, which is really understanding what they know already. And so it's very common for people to just broadcast at people rather than understand, well, have they heard, have they even heard of our brand? Do they know what we are? Have they ever considered us? Do they even know that they know your product? Do they need your product, right? And really kind of thinking through, are you trying to deliver awareness, consideration? Are you trying to convert unpent demand? Are you trying to activate a customer? Are you trying to get them to grow with you? Are you going to try and stop them from leaving you as a company? I think you've got to be really, really clear on like where the customer is at the moment in time you're talking to them. So, great sources of data there. Obviously, syndicated customer research, brand surveys to understand, do you have 100% awareness but 40% consideration, or 40% awareness and 40% consideration, right? So what campaign you deliver in those two scenarios is very, very different. So understanding that is kind of step 2. Step 3 is actually really deciding what you're going to tell them, right? And that sort of relates to what they know already. But this is kind of interesting because this is where product analytics can really come and help. Particularly if you're doing a campaign to an existing customer or you're doing lead nurture, your ability to kind of know, have they downloaded one of your white papers but haven't signed up for an account, or have they visited your website and bounced straight off? Making sure that you are tailoring your message to, where they've got in the customer journey. And again, product analytics can be very helpful here, as well as obviously Google Analytics and a lot of the marketing analytics that we use to work out where people are. And then last, but by no means least, because this is actually probably where most people focus their thinking around data, is what's the outcome, right? What results did it drive? Needless to say, if you want to demonstrate to your finance team that you've delivered a return on investment, or frankly, if you want to learn from this campaign for the next one, you really need to analyze what happened. And that's obviously a critical step. So for me, data is very, very crucial in that context. And what's most important actually is setting clear goals in advance. Like, it doesn't matter whether you hit them or don't hit them. Obviously, we all want to hit our goals, but what really matters is that you have forced yourself to make a hypothesis, a prediction of what you think is going to happen, and then that you measure your outcomes against what you thought was going to happen. And I think that's really the kind of essence behind your classic A/B testing or test and control is the idea that you're validating against what would have happened had you done nothing, or in this case what actually happened versus what you thought was going to happen. Because if you do that, then it's going to dramatically improve your ability to predict for the future, improve your forecasting skills, and actually really learn from the campaign, because you've got something to benchmark things against. So I think for me, the 4-step process, I could give you hundreds of examples of campaigns I've run, but every single one of them, I use data in all of those 4 steps in different ways in order to both create the campaign and determine what the right strategy is, but also to evaluate the performance at the end of it. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of how I use data for marketing. There's actually a couple. There's one from PayPal and one from Snappy. So I'll start with the PayPal one, and if we have time, I'll cover the Snappy one too. But so I think the PayPal one was a campaign. It was called Want It, Get It. The strategy was, I think, I'm most proud of it because I think we were really breaking new ground. So, the challenge was, this is in 2013, so you have to wind back your mind a long time. But in 2013, at least in the UK, PayPal was known as the thing you used on eBay, right? That's what people thought PayPal was. It's how you got paid on eBay, right? And you needed to have a PayPal account because that was what PayPal was to people. And at that time, we actually were I had been brought on board to PayPal to actually build out the consumer business because most of the customers that PayPal had come to PayPal through eBay. And actually, PayPal really wanted to establish itself as a brand and a company in its own right that was really powering digital commerce. Of course, it was important to, eBay was a crucial customer, but actually, PayPal was accepted on, thousands and thousands of websites across the world, as well as eBay. But the perception was that it was just for eBay. So really the strategy was how to redefine what PayPal was in the mind of a consumer. So step 1 was really to establish and understand what consumers thought of PayPal, right? And so that was really about using brand metrics and brand data to understand brand awareness, brand consideration, and keywords that consumers associated with PayPal. And it was out of that market research data that we were able to establish fundamentally what the barrier to growing beyond eBay was. And that was a perception that PayPal wasn't accepted widely in other retailers online or on mobile. And so what we wanted to do was do 3 things with the campaign. We wanted to reframe what PayPal was as a brand. We wanted to establish PayPal as a fun, dynamic, relevant brand to consumers, and to try and associate us with mobile technologies very specifically and ways to pay on mobile. And the third thing that we wanted to try to do was really kind of build this flywheel of consumer acquisition outside of eBay. And so we used a lot of data to do that. And what we actually had to do was persuade the organization to invest in more than just digital media. So we actually had to tell the story with data about why, in order to change people's perceptions of a brand, that you had to do more than simply focus on the conversion funnel. You had to go right up to awareness and consideration and not just focus on conversion. And historically, a lot of the media spend had been spent on digital paid search and digital conversion. So the way we went about doing that was, we used brand data to establish that we needed to tell a different story. And we actually also used brand partnerships to associate our brand with 20 of the biggest retailers in the UK that were all associated with being innovators and very digitally orientated, whether that was Spotify or John Lewis, which is a big retailer here. We actually partnered with all of those brands and featured them in our advert so that the messaging is very consistent. And then we actually, with a data perspective, we ran a geo test for TV, which is very difficult to do. It's actually harder to do in the UK than it is to do in the US, where you have DMAs and you can run TV in different geographic areas. And we had to run a very complex geo test to prove the uplift in customer acquisition and usage in the specific geographic areas where we aired the commercial versus where we didn't. And so we were able to really kind of bring to life, using data to set the strategy and determine what the creative positioning should be, as well as a huge amount of data analytics to create a synthetic control test, which is, I had an amazing data scientist work on it to build out the modeling for this, to help us prove, like, categorically that broadcast media drove a positive ROI. And I'm really proud of it, because fundamentally we persuaded the whole global company to actually change their philosophy about the marketing mix and what were the right channels to drive behavior. And as a result, the US team and lots of other teams around the world were able to run integrated campaigns for the first time. So that was very, very close to my heart, and I think is a great example of how we use data both to define the campaign as well as demonstrate the ROI, which I think are both really critical things in marketing. So we did run a ton of PR. I have a philosophy of integrated marketing, and PR and partnerships are always part of that mix. They're very underrepresented often in campaign development for marketing, and I'm a big believer in them. So yeah, I mean, again, what was great is that we worked with 20 brands. So we actually went out with partnership statements with a lot of those brands, and also a lot of social activity to support that. So again, we got a lot of extra reach and mileage by doing it not just in our own right, but also with other brands as well. Again, it is harder to measure. You can, but you know, we talk about the type of metrics that we use in Snappy, for example. We look at the number of top-tier publications that publish an article about us. We rank that against our competitors. We look at unique monthly visitors for the publications, but we also look at kind of what I call momentum, which is the frequency that we're getting coverage, because a lot of PR is about momentum. It's about having a drumbeat of news that, you know, consistently you've got a reason to go and talk to journalists, and then they start having reasons to come and talk to you. And I think, you know, you can measure the success of it really to do based on both how much coverage you're actually getting, but also how often journalists are reaching out to you for things like bylines and for contributing to stories that they're doing. And I think that takes time, but I think that really drives results in terms of being able to measure impact and, you know, get access to essentially relatively low cost media. I thought this was a really interesting question, because I do actually look at a lot of metrics very frequently. But I think if I had to boil it down to the two things as a marketer that I'm interested in, right? Marketing's role in my mind is, number one is to acquire customers, okay? To acquire as many as possible, as cost effectively as possible. And number two, to drive engagement and growth from existing customers and stop them from churning, okay? And if I think about those two goals, I think in terms of the first one, acquisition, the two most important metrics are cost to acquire versus the lifetime value of a customer. So CAC versus CLV or CTA, depending on where you come from, either CAC or CTA, whatever. For me, those are just business critical metrics for any marketer. They are quite hard to calculate, and you have to use a lot of contributing metrics and leading indicators that give you some sense of what those might be, because it's quite difficult to calculate those. But fundamentally, you should be continuing to spend on marketing up until the point where the lifetime value, you're starting to spend more than the lifetime value of a customer. And so that's a really, really critical calculation that we all need to be doing. In terms of engagement and growth, at the end of the day, for me, this is about how many active customers you have, not how many people you acquired, but how many people are using your solution on a weekly, monthly, or annual basis. What products they're using, how much usage you've got across your different suite of products, and then obviously how happy they are with their experience. NPS is a great indicator of likelihood to churn, as is inactivity on your platform. So I think there's a lot of metrics that you need to look at for engagement and growth. But ultimately, if you had to sum it up, comes back to my point about marketing being not a cost driver, but a profit driver, right? Which is, ultimately we're here to grow revenue cost effectively. The company's revenue is obviously the thing that we're all aligned to across the organization. But if I had to kind of bring it to something that was much more closely owned by marketing as opposed to everybody in the company, we used to have a metric called net new actives. And again, we're kind of looking at that at Snappy now as well, which is really kind of the number of customers you're acquiring or reactivating, less the number that are churning, but all of them have to be using your product. So it gives you a really good indication, because obviously the more activity there are, the more revenue you're going to make. It gives you a really good indication of how well, as a marketer, you are getting customers to use and enjoy your product, and that's really what we're here to do. All right, I have 3 top tips for any marketer. Number 1, don't use averages if you want to be better than average. It's very tempting to look at the average value of a customer or the average profile of a customer because it's simple. But customers are not average. And if you want to do great marketing, you need to go a little bit deeper than the average and look at the ranges and look at the segments and make sure that you have a story for an individual and not for an average individual. Second tip, don't forget that marketing is an art and a science, not just a science and not just an art. It's the yin and yang of, creativity and data. And I think it's very important to remember that, yes, data is very powerful, but never underestimate the power of emotion. Because even if you work in B2B, you're still talking to real people who actually are driven by their feelings and not their thoughts most of the time. So data can help you, and it can give you insights, but it can't tell the story. And it's stories that get people to change their behavior. My third top tip is that data is generally backward looking and marketing is generally forward looking. Don't forget it, because even with the most fantastic AI in the world, we're not that great at predicting the future. And the reason we're not that great in predicting the future is because as human beings, we have this magical thing called innovation and a desire to break patterns and do things differently from the way we've done them in the past. So don't forget that, that data is part of the story, but it's not the whole story, and that we're in the business of looking forward, and we can learn from the past, but it's not going to predict the future. And if you really want to be a standout marketer, you're going to have to do something that stands out from the past.